Christian and Shannon Nossum, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to this for a couple weeks since we had it planned. I met you guys, about a year ago at, I think, my first ever networking event in Seattle when I moved here. And I was really impressed with what you guys had going on. You actually invited me out to one of your projects a couple weeks later that we walked. I believe that was in the U District, if I'm not mistaken. You showed me the student rental. You showed me the DADU. You told me what you guys got going on, and I've been following you guys and friends with you ever since. You got a great podcast. So we'll unpack all that on today's show. So before we get into that, though, how did you guys meet? How did you get into real estate? Let me hear your backgrounds, and then we'll get right into the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. We're excited to chat.
We've been looking forward to this as well. All right, so how we met, we actually met working for the Seattle Mariners, believe it or not. So we met working there, just like a fun high school, college job. And then
I was at UW at the time. And then from there, I went to law school. Christian was always kind of interested in real estate. Pretty soon after we met, he ended up getting his real estate license. 6 months later, we bought our first property, and then we moved into it together.
Yeah.
And it was a duplex in Wallingford, 2-bed unit on the upper level, and then a 7-bed on the lower level.
Oh, wow.
That was our first endeavor into real estate investing.
that was a house hack. Yeah. And we made $250 a month living in our own duplex. And that was 2005. So how I structured that was crazy because it was 2005. So
Yeah.
I had been an agent, licensed agent, commission only for a whole 6 months at that point. I don't know even know if we'd sold a house. I'm sure I did, but not much.
You'd sold, I think, a few.
Yeah.
Many.
I had a total of $2,000 to my name.
Okay.
I had like none.
She had none. She was at school
Fully
still. And I bought this house with $1,500 of my $2,000 as my down payment and closing costs. And I got an 80% loan. And then I got convinced the seller to do a seller carryback with 20%. And then I wrapped my closing costs into the loan and all that stuff. So I literally bought a $535,000 property for $1,500 out of pocket. And
That sounds like an infomercial.
I know. Exactly.
It's real. It's insane.
So
In 2005, when the market was still going up.
still going crazy, and
Yeah.
you just had to have a pulse to get a loan, as witnessed by me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what started it. Like, we made $250 a month. I was crossing my fingers. There were no major issues ever because I had no money to pay for it.
We were lucky.
Yeah. Then we just kind of started, we went, oh, this kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
We just kind of kept going with that.
That's awesome.
And then I became a lawyer and did that for a little bit. And then he kept begging me to work with him. And I kept saying, no, come on, we'd be a great team. Investor, agent, like, let's go. And I'm like, no. So it took about a decade. And finally I agreed.
So 2015, you were like, you know what? Enough is enough. Let's get after it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys have been doing this for 2 decades now, and you've seen a lot because you bought that. It's funny. You guys say duplex. That's the proper term for it. But back on the East Coast, we call it a 2-family. So I got to start saying duplex. So you bought a duplex. Obviously, you got paid to live there. You got in the landlord business. So that all makes complete sense. You get your foot in the door with real estate. You start house hacking. You eventually get into the business full time. So now, to give everyone a snapshot on your business, when we first met, you got the DADU stuff that we'll talk about. We'll probably spend the bulk of the call on that. And then you're doing these student housing purchases. And the numbers were amazing, right? They were amazing on those rental numbers because I got a bunch of rentals myself. And they're not even close to that. So let's get into the DADU game first, and then we'll cover the student housing, and then, we'll give everyone kind of a real rundown how it works out here. So if people are not familiar with a DADU, can you explain to the listeners what that is?
So most people have heard of an ADU, which is just accessory dwelling unit, ADU. In Seattle, I think we're pretty unique where we now call it a DADU or a DADU, which is just a detached ADU. So ADU, we also have ADUs, which are more like AADU because they're attached.
It's not confusing at all.
Not at all confusing. But we're pretty much the only ones, I think, that have really nicknamed or stuck with the DADU nickname. But it's basically, a backyard cottage. That's the easy way. Everyone's heard of a backyard cottage. It's detached from the original house that was there. You put a house in the backyard, and in Seattle, you can technically sell them off separately. And that's kind of what we're doing in a nutshell.
So when you explain that to me, if I think someone mentioned it at one of those meetups, and then someone said you could condo it off, and like a light bulb went off in my head. because I asked about how much it costs to build, and then I asked about how much it costs to sell, and I looked at the spread on the square footage and the location, and I'm like, man, you can make a lot of money doing that. Because, like, for example, a lot of our listeners are back east. New York needs that just as bad as Seattle needs that. There's a huge housing shortage, but the people over there are so, like, NIMBY, like, not in my backyard, this will never be allowed. There's so much politics over there.
Yep.
They don't allow any of that. Like, they hate building, they hate development. So, like, there's all these high prices back east. And if they allowed a DADU play to come into that region, it would, number one, make housing more affordable. It would create more units on the market. You know, more people could become homeowners. And I'm just like, how do I get this east, right? How do I get this thing to come
Well,
east?
it's definitely spreading. Like, it is spreading from the West Coast across the nation.
Yeah.
I think there's now 14 states that allow them. So the numbers are definitely going up. And the reason why, a big reason, and this, I'm not hearing anybody talk about this, but it makes so much sense to me. Every time you add a house in the backyard, you're getting more tax dollars. These are like government-backed flips almost. where it's incentivizing you to build these things because they're making a ton of money off property taxes. And that was before just a bare backyard that had nothing.
Yeah.
And they're not having to add in more infrastructure either. They don't have to add more schools, more roads, more anything. They already have it all there. You're just getting more density. And it's when they start to see that, it was the same thing with marijuana. Marijuana not passed.
Marijuana. Same
Yeah,
thing.
DADUs and marijuana, hand in hand. States how much money Washington and Colorado made in tax dollars. And they went from no, never to, oh, never mind. Yes, we'll take that. We'll
literally.
$1 billion in tax revenue that we didn't have before for doing nothing. Like, yeah, sure, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And so it's going to spread more and more, in my opinion, and it's going to get bigger and bigger because it just makes sense. And it does provide affordable housing too.
I was going to say, the politicians love that affordable housing piece. It's a great argument for them.
Yeah.
And the thing with that too is, like, now that I'm, like, you know, establishing myself here doing properties, they get the property taxes on a reoccurring basis, and then they get the excise tax because now you got like one-time income, and then when you sell, you get income again, and then you got reoccurring property taxes, and you don't have to take any risk as the city because the builder is the one putting all the risk up, and, you know, you're just allowing for that to happen. And the city, from what you guys told me, is pretty friendly with getting these permits pushed through quicker than, like, for example, like my neighbor right across the street. She just bought like 3 houses and she's like tearing them down and just doing ground up construction, no DAD. She's like, the permit process in the city is a disaster.
Yeah. And meanwhile, an ADU or a DADU, it's, you know, 6 weeks to 6 months, maybe at the worst case, to get permits.
Yeah.
It depends on what you build too, because they have these certain plans that the city has already said, we approve of these. So if you want this on your property, we're going to pass you through super fast because we've already said yes to this specific layout.
Interesting. Before we get into the mechanics on like what would make a good DADU deal, here's an idea that I have. My buddy in Long Island loves doing modular homes. So he'll buy a lot. This is bigger than a DADU, but he'll put a big old modular on there. He'll save some money on his construction because it's coming out of a factory, and he sells it as real property. I wonder if there's someone out on the West Coast that could manufacture these little suckers and then modular home these bad boys. And have you guys heard of anyone doing that?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a couple companies that have tried it. Some of them have not worked out for whatever reason. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you still have to go through the whole permitting process.
Yeah.
Because the only permits that are going through quick are the pre-approved plans. All the other ones are going through the same process, basically the same process as a new built home.
Okay.
Well, not necessarily. I think they're faster than like your traditional new build.
Slightly faster.
But yeah, when you do a custom one, it's definitely a little bit.
Got it. So they would really need to get like their manufactured model in the green with the city. And then if the city has record of that model, then it could probably expedite it. But I'm thinking that's even, that's
yeah, they've all gone out of business.
That makes the most sense in the world to me, because some of the lots in Seattle, like the duplex that we bought, the very first one we ever bought, the side yard is only like 5 feet on each side. Like that's as wide as it is because it's built in 1924. Like they went as big as they could. You can't get construction crews back there. So if you could instead have a modular, crane it over the top of the house, plop it down in this perfectly good backyard, that would make a lot of sense. So I see the need, I see the demand. I don't see it actually happening yet, but maybe, eventually it will. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe they can make a comeback. So this really kind of started in the city of Seattle. I think the whole state of Washington, didn't they pass a law in January where you can do this in any part of the state?
Yeah. So the state, basically July 1st, the state says that every city has to allow at least 2 units per lot statewide. And then if it's within, or if your city has a population over 275,000 people, you have to allow 4 units per lot. And if you're within a half mile of a high transit stop,
Which nobody knows what that's defined.
they
as,
haven't
but-
defined that.
It's very broad.
Then you can do 6 units per lot.
Wow. Can you condo all those off or just build them?
Again, yeah. This is what's crazy though. Every city has to submit their plan to the state, and then the state has to give it their stamp of approval, or they say, nope, that doesn't fly. You didn't do good enough job. They send it back, and they have to do that before the end of June. So
It's happening right now. So
Yeah.
a lot of these cities who already don't have these in place are right now in the process of these meetings trying to figure out what are we going to allow, what kind of setbacks, what kind of height restrictions, how are we going to accommodate this new law in our specific spot.
Because time is of the essence for these cities. So let's get into the numbers on these DADUs. So is there a minimum lot size requirement? Let's just talk Seattle City proper because that's where it's most common.
So I always start this question with this answer. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. A lot of times it just doesn't make sense. So let's say that like the minimum I believe is 3,200 square foot for a lot.
But you shouldn't probably do that in most scenarios.
3,200 is the minimum to put a dadu in the backyard. Because where the hell are you going to put it?
Just-
If the house is 1,500 square feet,
It may be like pushed way to the front of the lot. And
oh, that would look so weird.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You don't really ever see that. We've done it on 4,000 square feet, but that was on an alley. That was the one that you actually walked with us.
Yeah.
And that was the very first one we ever did. And we did a custom one because you couldn't fit anything else in there. So we had to build up, and then it cantilevered over, and it was, we probably wouldn't have done that again. I don't know, maybe we would.
We maybe would have laid it out a little different. I think for us, we try to look for like at least 5,000 square feet. I feel like that's really the sweet spot where you start to be able to make a nice profit. If
Yeah.
you put things too close, you're just going to lower value on everything. And you're just not going to get good ARV on either property.
So the resale value on these, because just to share with my listeners, there's a house down the street for me in West Seattle. It's probably built in the 30s or 40s. You could tell the person bought the house and they rehabbed it, so it looks really fancy now. Right behind it, there's a DADU, 1,000 square foot model match thing to the city. That has its own address. It's condoed off. So that developer bought the property, renovated the house, sold the house. While they were doing that, they built the DADU in the backyard, brand new construction, and then sold that DADU as a separate parcel. So they had 2 sales. So when you're doing that, what is a typical sales price that makes sense for the project to make a good amount of money? Because development is not cheap, especially in this area of the country.
So for us, our kind of baseline, and I don't think this is true for all people who do data developments. I think we're a little
Definitely not based on what I've seen selling. If
Yeah.
people paying for it. I'm like,
For
yeah.
us, we want our data to sell for at least 700. That's kind of our baseline. If it's not going to sell for 700,000, we're probably not going to want to do the project. Well, it costs about 350,000 to build this dadu. Some soft costs in there, maybe about 15 to 20,000. So you're all in at 370-ish. And then you want to sell for 700.
So you're almost doubling your money.
That's a home run. Your basis is about 50% of the value.
Yeah, we did have one in Magnolia that sold for 925.
A DADU sold for 925,
Yeah.
and the cost is the same.
Correct. Which is why we try to find, we did research on where the dadus sell for the highest value in the city.
Yeah.
That's where we try to find our lots. Because if it costs the same price to build it, it's the same amount of effort. Why not do it where it's
Yeah.
going to sell for
Yeah,
real?
building in Magnolia versus South Seattle. Yeah.
We're really picky on the deals that we do. Like, we don't have a crew that's sitting around waiting for us. So we don't have to keep them busy. And I think this is where some investors get in trouble.
Yep.
They have to keep their crews busy, and they buy marginal deals that at the end of the day get marginal, if any, profit. is just to keep their guys around, which we don't have to do that. So it just makes more sense for us to be super picky. And
There was one dadu that sold in our neighborhood where we live for, was it 1, 2?
yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. It was a street facing and it was bigger than the typical one.
So the city says you can't build over 1,000 square feet. That's the max size for a dadu. This is current.
Right.
So this could change. It's
Yeah.
draft is to make it potentially up to 1,500 square feet, which would be a game changer. But it's currently 1,000. They say anything under 7 feet doesn't count towards that. And if it's a garage, that doesn't count. And if it's
Underground.
closet or if it's underground, those don't count as well.
Yeah.
So the one that you walked with us, that was on a slope, and the whole basement that downstairs wasn't really basement. That's where you walk in the front door.
Yeah.
That square footage didn't count. And then we went up and it had, was it 3 stories?
Yeah.
And so that was a little over 1,300 square feet.
But you only got counted as 1,000.
Yeah.
So that buyer got
Top-
extra value.
Yeah. The bottom and then the top floor, it was vaulted. You know, it was only like 4 feet wide or 5 feet wide, whatever it was over 7 feet. Everything else below that didn't count as square footage. So there's ways to get around it. And that's the one in our neighborhood that sold for 1.2. I think it was marketed as like a 1,250 or 1,300 square foot house. It looked and felt like a regular old house. It was gorgeous. Like it was street facing, like you said, had a garage, had a nice backyard, felt like a regular
You
house.
didn't know it was
You
a
wouldn't have
dadu.
known it's a dadu,
You didn't know.
That is awesome. So how much value does it take off of the main property? Like let's say, for example, like in West Seattle, a regular house in good shape, let's call it, I don't know, $900,000, right? As, you know, current condition, no DADU. If you dadu the backyard or side yard or any part of the yard for that matter, how much value does that drop off the front house?
This is where I think the investors get caught on these deals.
They get
is
caught
They,
with it,
they
yeah.
think I got this yard for free and now anything I make is profit.
Yeah.
And they don't
Yeah.
consider that you are going to have a value drop on your front house.
Yeah.
So that's where they don't make any money on the overall deal. So I think this is where there's not a straight answer to this. It depends on what you are taking away from that house. So if you're taking away the parking from that main house, let's say you had a garage and you're tearing it down in order to get access to the yard. That's going to be, in Seattle, 100,000 swing for that garage.
Yeah, for sure.
If you have a yard and you take it completely away and now front house has 0 yard, could be like a 10%, removal of value. And then if you're creating a lot of congestion, let's say they're really, really close to each other, that can also create a huge issue with your value on the front house. It really depends on the impact the data is going to have on those 3 things, right? Congestion, parking, and yard.
And
What
that
did you
all
do to it?
really is going to be determined by the comps in that neighborhood. So if it's a nicer neighborhood where every house has a nice big backyard, because it's all families that live there and that's what they're expecting. And
Yeah.
then you take this nice house that's big, well, maybe not nice when you bought it, but you don't give it a yard, that's going to change the value of that front house, the original house there. There's a lot of kind of variables that you have to factor in. And I think that's, again, where people get stuck. And
Yeah, but you could have up to probably 20% drop in value.
Yeah, so you got to know your numbers and say at this purchase price, if we're taking this current condition value, we're discounting 20% off it.
Yeah.
Now we're developing this. You got to, that's the thing with this. You really got to know this area, the city, the laws, the comps. Like you can't be doing this virtually in your underwear in Tampa, Florida, thinking you're getting rich in Seattle. So that is huge. Well, big opportunity for people in Seattle. So we talked really about income generation, doing very well with good net profits from these DADUs, but everyone gets into real estate, they read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, whatever. I want to buy rentals and never work again. By the way, that doesn't work. Rentals are a lot of work.
Yeah.
So you have found a way to make rentals work in Seattle in a bad landlord state and in an expensive market. What are you guys doing to make these things make sense out here in Seattle, out of all places?
so we like student rentals near the University of Washington. That just makes sense for us. That was the first thing we ever bought, like we talked about. That was a student rental. She was still a student at that time, which is funny.
Yeah, I understood the market and like what the students were looking for and where to advertise. And like I knew that from the other side. So I think it was an easy kind of niche to do at the time.
And they also didn't look at us as weird when we're like, I'm a baby-faced 22-year-old with this house. Yeah, showing them. And they're like, wait, are you the roommate? Like, I'm like, no, I'm the owner. And they're like, what? And so they would they honestly would be like, how did you do this? And they'd always have some side talk with me. And I'm like, dude, I'll tell you how to do it, but you should really rent this because I like you. And they'd be like, I like you. I will rent this. I'm like, sweet. That's all I really
bud. Have your parents co-sign that lease while you're at it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So for us, it just kind of made sense to keep buying those because they did make a lot of sense. So like I learned how to do this from my old landlord. So when I
There you
moved
go.
with these houses and he was like, hey, you're kind of into real estate. Do you want to show, I have another house, like literally in the alley, another house similar to yours, a big 10-bedroom house. I live on Mercer Island. So I'm like, 20, 30 minutes away. Would you just show one of the bedrooms for me real quick? And if they rent it, I'll pay $100. I was like, that's the easiest $100 I've ever made in my life. I walk across the alley and show one bedroom. It takes all of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, deal.
So you kind of got to learn his whole process,
Yeah.
which was super helpful. And we still talk to him, and
Yeah.
he still
He
owns.
probably still lives on Mercer Island. He's got all those rentals.
But yeah, I feel like, this is just like what we've always known, I guess. We do have another rental that's not this, but this is primarily these student rentals, what we like doing. And I think part of why is because the students generally pay. They have so many streams of income from student loans to jobs to parents that we really haven't had issues of them not paying. And
Yeah.
UW is such a good school now that the people that get in there are really smart and very responsible.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
we really don't have any issues with them, and it's been great.
Yep. So far, so good.
Interesting. So the students are paying, you're renting by the bedroom. Is that how you do it? Or how do you kind of structure that?
For the most part, renting by the bedroom. On occasion, we'll have like a group of like athletes or friends that'll come to us and want like a whole house. But usually it's by the bedroom, which we do make good cash flow doing that, but it is the biggest pain in the ass ever. And I can say that because I'm the one who does it. Like I manage these rentals
Thanks, babe.
on my own. It is horrible.
Wait, renting it by the bedroom's a pain in the ass?
Yes.
100%.
Oh, because we got 6 leases on 6 bedrooms.
But they're not 6. They're like 10, 9, 10, 11. Like that's
Yeah.
11 bedrooms?
We have an 11-bed house. So
Yeah.
those are usually like the size that these houses are. So it's a lot. I think we have 44 tenants right now. I should think of
I thought it was 52 or
It's-
something.
I don't
I don't know.
That's a lot of I'm just thinking about the bookkeeping on that. That sounds like a
horrible.
stress fest.
Yeah.
Well, just showing the units, like, think about when you put your unit up for rent and you want to schedule a time to show it. And then they want to do it, and fill out an application and get the lease signed. Like that times as many rooms.
52. Oh, yeah, that seems like a pain in the ass. But it's worth it.
I mean, it cash flows. Gigantic pain in the
And
ass.
I'm willing to go through that pain because this is what we've always done. I don't know any different. For 20 years is what we've done. And yes, it does cash flow well. But I think with people who want to do this, unless they're willing to go through the pain and torture like I am,
Yeah.
it's very hard to find a property manager who's willing to do that for you.
Yeah, I mean, with student rent, with 11 bedrooms, it's not even worth, because you have to pay them so much money to manage it, and then you're going to still get calls anyway. So can you get, like, I'm thinking here, like, is it $1,000 a bedroom, or is that too cheap? Like, I don't know the area, like, for rent.
It's a good ballpark. It depends on where
Okay.
the house is located, how close it is to the school. Like, there's a street called Gree Row, which is on 17th, which if you have a house on that, the bedrooms are over 1,000.
Oh, wow.
Because you're like, that's where all the frats and sororities
Yep.
are.
Yeah, you're right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Most of ours are in the 9+ up to 1,000 range.
Those numbers make sense because you could still pay a lot for the property considering it's in Seattle and you're getting such a bigger revenue piece on the bedroom or whatever, just the fact that it's a student rental. Cause like in my area, like a, 3-4 bedroom house is like $4,000 to $5,000 a month max. And there's 3 bedrooms in my house.
Yeah.
So it's like, if there was 8 bedrooms up, that's where the numbers make sense in Seattle. Cause you're going off of the fact that it's in that area where people will pay a premium.
Correct. We did do one cool thing we did was a burr on one of these last year. So we bought it for $860 and we put in maybe $150.
Yeah, I think it was 150.
So we added some bedrooms, just finished off some square footage, and now we have it rented and it's now 11 bedrooms. And so we pulled out all the cash that was in it and it still cash flows.
That's a burr on steroids.
155?
Yeah, the value ARV was 155.
Yeah, crazy price on that. You got a local
Well, it
lifetime.
was really messed up.
It was.
Oh, it was banged up.
I'm sure they were growing weed in the basement.
Oh, wow. Is that in the U district up there?
Yeah.
Wow. I call that, I'll make this up on this podcast. That's a big league burr. The ones I do are like minor league burrs compared to that. We're talking
Yeah.
300-400 grand.
We were talking about the TV show earlier. That's a $1 million burrs.
$1 million burrs. There you go. It's got an awesome story. You guys got great stuff you're doing. I mean, this is a great show. I want to start to wrap it up here. But what advice would you give someone? I mean, if they're in an expensive market, you know, New York, Seattle, Miami, Cali, one of these places where they feel like their market's too hard. Like, what would you say to them?
For me, I would say if they're doing ADUs or talking about doing ADUs, jump on it. Be the first in, because there's opportunity there. And the people that made the biggest profit are the ones that started early and just kind of the forefront of it all. There's a little bit of risk with that too, because you don't know exactly how the city, even though the rule says one thing, might be slightly different, but could be a huge payoff at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my advice would be, so sometimes these big cities feel intimidating to people, and the price point feels like there's no way I can invest at this price point. What I've seen people do in Seattle, which I think works really well, is to go to your meetups, go network with people, find people who are actively doing projects and partner with them. And that doesn't only mean that you have the cash, but you do have the ability and the effort to go take the pictures every week and to, just support that process.
Yep.
And so once you have your track record built and you've partnered with people and you know how it works, then you go raise capital and you are able to do projects on your own.
That's great advice, because people think they can't bring value to people, but they can bring more value than they think. So let's actually talk about that. So you guys are looking for people to partner with on these. So if they're interested and they want to reach out to you to connect, to see how they can work with you from a partnership standpoint or whatever the case might be, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, I'd say probably our Instagram. It's just Awesome Nossum.
Awesome Nossum. That's a great name. So we'll put that Instagram handle in the show notes on YouTube as well. Your podcast is called Awesome in Seattle Podcast. So throw that in
here with all our stuff.
They're as local as it gets, folks. We'll put that podcast in the show notes as well. I appreciate you guys being a guest on the show. This was a lot of fun. This stuff gives me energy, unlike dealing with banks and sellers all day. So a real good break to my work day. Sure. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. See ya.